Hello and welcome to episode 30 of the Freo Big Footy podcast. This week we'll be going back looking over the victorious Derby win last week where Fremantle managed to get over the line after a poor second quarter, getting up 11 goals 773 to 7 goals 1254. We'll have a bit of a look at the changes for this week in the big upcoming game against Port Adelaide, and then obviously have a look at a few of the key matchups for the upcoming game as well. Joining us this week is our resident Victorian cheering guru, Seppo. How are you, mate?
I am good and glad to be back for a big week of footy.
Absolutely. It's sort of been all about Jack Viney this week with the bump going on, but now that that's all been cleared, and probably for the best as well, I think most people would agree, even though, and obviously there's a bit of talk about Fife's bump as well, but let's hope that common sense prevails and that we sort of see footy go back to the way it has been in the past few years, because although we don't want to see guys getting clocked behind the play or head injuries, I think the fair old bump needs to stay in. It's just part of our game and makes it unique, to be honest.
Certainly a big talking point on the forum this week, and it's going to be interesting with now that decision at hand, how many people are going to be looking at the spotlight and crucial decisions and the match review panel decisions to come out of this week's of footy, and especially with the bye on, there's more standalone games and there'll be more eyes on each game as it happens.
Absolutely. All right, last week Fremantle came out in the first quarter pretty strongly against West Coast and managed to get away to an early lead and controlled the ball really well before they sort of West Coast got on top in the second quarter, but really poor kicking 1 goal late sort of ended up making their task very much a difficult one. And then Fremantle gradually got on top with their class, in particular through the midfield, and managed to pull away to a comfortable sort of 19-point victory, and with the Eagles kicking 2 goals late. I think the pleasing thing for me, Seppo, in this game was the fact that a couple of our probably lower tier guys stood up who haven't probably done that as we expected all year. So guys like Lachie Neale in particular obviously had a good game winning the Glendenny medal, but just some of our lesser lights who probably haven't played as well since the start of this season, just managing to come back in and do a bit, which was really pleasing to see.
Yeah, it was really good to see how we actually held up, especially for those early moments when Eagles really pushed us. I know they didn't capitalise, but we were doing it without McFarlane and Dawson. Even Clancy Pearce went down, I think, quite early with his injury. So we actually held pretty tight, and for the coaches to be able to make those decisions to pull Main back and even Clark drop back, and then when we pushed forward, we still managed to capitalise on our inside 50s where we hadn't previously over the last couple of weeks. So it was really good to see a lot of guys get on the end of them and really fight back. As well, it looks like the Eagles were, even after half time, they managed to get the first 2 and actually get a bit of a lead, and we really wrestled it back. And it's good to see that we're starting, as someone said this week on the forum, getting our mojo back, but it's definitely a long way to go, and we've only just sort of starting to gain momentum. It's really good to see some inroads into our game plan that we know.
Yeah, I think it was, as you said, an interesting thing in terms of the way, we've gradually, it's been a pretty tough start to the year, and, for all the doomsayers last week, the reality is that if you look at those sort of bottom 10 sides, we've got to play just about all of them after the break. Our run up to the bye has been pretty tough with the 6-day breaks on top of that. But, interesting last week, even guys like, I think Lachie Neale must have had his first and only probably career hit out, which was interesting. But, as I said, it was just those guys. And even like there was a bit of talk during the week over East about, talking about halfback, guys off halfback, and like guys like Duffield are starting to get a bit more recognition as well. With I think he had 100% efficiency in the Derby, which is fantastic, with 24 touches. And
even got to a couple of the middle centre clearances. I think it was in the third when we really started to push forward that he was actually streaming away from the midfield and pushed higher up the ground. Great to see.
Yeah. And obviously De Boer came out early and showed some intent, kicking the first goal of the game, and after being dropped, but then getting a late reprieve with the withdrawal of Stephen Hill, I thought his game was a lot more productive on the weekend and took a few marks and just was a little bit more of a threat out there than he had been in the previous few weeks, that's for sure.
Yeah, did a good job on Hearn, I think, as well.
Yeah. And I think it was interesting to see this week as well, Seppo, the fact that some of our players didn't bomb the ball in that inside 50. They sort of lowered their eyes a little bit and looked for the options that were available. And the forward line looked a lot more better for it, even though Pav didn't kick any goals. At least it was a positive step in terms of just not bombing it there and allowing their tall defenders to come over the top and sort of take it away. And I think the sort of 3 goals by Clark was a real positive step forward as well, just having another threat down there other than Pavlich in terms of the tools.
And you can see the Eagles were manning Pav, and we were almost using Pav as a decoy, and the players were lowering their eyes and rolling on top and sort of pushing forward. And yeah, like I said, those goals from Clark late, and there's just the pickup. He's so agile as a big player, and great to see that, when he pushed forwards, he does know how to kick a goal. I think he's a very good goal kick, not only a field kick and set shot, but he does well when he pushes forwards, and that's what you want from your big men. And it's a difference between him and Hanneth that when they're in the side and pushing forward, they're very more mobile around the ground and help us when we set up and zone.
Yeah, and it was probably it was interesting to see last week, obviously, when Dawson went out with his ankle injury, which is a bit of a blow for us, but interesting to see that Ross Lyon push Main back, and Main seemed to do a pretty reasonable job on Darling, considering it's probably been a long time since he's played in the back line. And he was certainly serviceable down there for the time that he spent, and probably gave him a bit of a chance to get a few touches out there as well, which is so it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, there's been some talk with Lyon this week saying Main will spend another week in defence, so it'll be interesting to see whether he goes ahead with that or whether he starts Main in the forward line.
Yeah, it was quite interesting. As I was watching the game, I sort of didn't realise that. And I think Main did really well with the ball in hand coming off half-back, but he's still got a lot of work to do in terms of his defensive side if he is going to get a key post on one of the taller players. And coming up against this week with the inclusion we'll look at later, I think we've got the opportunity to push him more forward and don't give him that key role unless someone goes down during the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think obviously the inclusion this week of, when we get to that sort of like that speed through with Hill, and I think, just having that extra leg speed with Ballantyne was really critical. And I think it showed last week, the importance of Ballantyne in our forward line. And I think, to be honest with you, I think it would have made a big difference in that game against North having him out there than not having him there. And I think, hopefully he'll learn from that and be the last time he does one of those stupid decisions that ends up costing him weeks on the sidelines.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Any other points you want to bring up, Seppo, about the derby?
No, it was just good to actually get the win for a while during the game. It looked like we were done and dusted, but it's just great to get the 4 points over the local rival. And it's good to sort of set ourselves up that if we get a win out of our next 2, we'll be back on track. Like you say, we've played some tough teams up until now, and now we get a win on the board out of these next 2, and we can launch ourselves after the bye.
Yeah, and I think it's remiss of us to go any further, probably without speaking about Sandilands, who played his 200th game on the weekend, and probably a pretty fitting game as well. And probably most people would think probably a tad unlucky not to win the Glendenning medal, because he obviously had quite a dominant performance over Cox and Nat Nui. And I think the pleasing thing to see was that he actually clunked a few of the marks as well, which, we saw a bit of it in Geelong last year down in the final, and even in some of the finals games. And you thought he was going to sort of take that next step, but he struggled a little bit probably in the last 2 to 3 weeks just holding those marks, but he seemed to do it a lot better on the weekend.
Yeah, I noticed where the marks were taken. They weren't exactly where we'd like, and I think a couple, they were defensive saving marks, I think, and picking off the kick-outs from the Eagles. But he did a couple of good things around the ground, not just winning and absolutely dominating those centre hit-outs. I think if you combined Nat Nui's and Cox's hit-outs, it doesn't even get close to what Sandilands did. So it's just great to see him get back up and show that he's a really, really good ruckman, and in his 200th game. It was great to see.
Yeah, and obviously some of as you said, like those who've been down a little bit in form, hopefully we'll see them back that up again this week. So guys like Lockie Neal, who hadn't been getting a lot, and even probably guys like Subin, who looked all right as the sub on the weekend. He seemed to come in and do a little bit more. And even Crowley had a pretty reasonable game on Luke Shuey and kept him quiet. But it's just good to see some of those players getting back to some sort of form, and even De Boer. Hopefully we'll see those guys step up again this week, because it will certainly be a tough game against Port this week at Adelaide Oval.
And it was interesting just to see how Fife played and came back after being shut out for most of that second quarter. It's when we really went backwards in our scoreline as Fife got shut out and we weren't as influential with what we could do. And can't remember if it was Selwood or Shepherd or someone went to Fife and really kept him out of it. But he clawed his way back into the game and finished up after on fire. I think he got 13 in the first quarter. Got the clamps on him and then he broke free and really helped. So it's great to see that with the inclusion of another midfielder this week, if we can link up with Mundy, Barlow, Fife, and those outside runners.
Yeah, we're slowly getting our sort of key midfield back together, and we'll certainly need it this week with the Port Adelaide games. And speaking of which, the changes for this week for the Port Adelaide game, Alex Silvani gets his chance this week to impress, coming in for into defence along with Stephen Hill, with the two outs being Luke McFarlane with a quad, which is obviously quite a big loss for us, being our key back, along with Zach Dawson, who's the patroller of the back line down there. So a fair bit will fall on the shoulders of Michael Johnson this week, controlling that back line or that back six. So hopefully we'll see that. Well, for Port Adelaide, they've got probably two really good key ins with Alapati Carlisle coming back in the defensive position, along with Hamish Hartlett, one of their better midfielders, and the sort of energizer bunny, Kane Mitchell, who just runs all day but will likely be the sub in this game. While the three guys out, Tom Jonas, Ben Newton, and Paul Stewart, are probably not in the class of players that they've got coming in. So they'll certainly be a stronger team than they were last week, who probably had a reasonably comfortable and easy game against GWS in Canberra. What do you think about changes this week, Seppo?
Well, I know there's been a lot of conjecture around our inclusions with Silvani and whether we should have brought Ibbotson in as well for defensive support. But when you look at who we're playing and who Port they've got as their key forwards with Jay Schultz and Westhoff, I think Silvani and Johnson can do the job. We don't really need that third tall defender. And we could have Main back if we need to be. But I think in terms of who we're coming up against, the inclusions are nice, and we get Stephen Hill back in, which is another runner, and it will be wet, so it'll be a scrappy affair, no doubt, or even a bit greasy. So it's going to suit guys like Clancy Pearce and Nick Subin down there. It almost reminds me of the Adelaide game we played last year, and guys like Barlow just thrive in the wet. So hopefully it's a game that sort of suits the side that we've picked. I think we've done well with the selections and who we play, although there is a chance that maybe Ibbotson or someone might come up. But the fact that he's only really had 5 minutes of AFL time over the last few weeks with his shoulder injury means that we're sort of going in with a really good side, and we're doing like for like, well, not like for like changes, but we're picking a team to really face Port Adelaide for what they've got on offer.
I think the key point for us will be whether Ross Lyon, obviously Ross Lyon loves to play the +1, and Johnson is the best, probably I'd argue the best in the league at playing that position. So if we just go with the two key backs in Silvani and Johnson, I don't think with Schultz and Westhoff down there, we're going to be able to run with that Johnson running the +1. I may be able to start on one of those. He certainly won't be able to play on Schultz, but he may be able to run on Westhoff for a little bit. But I think that's going to be the key. So I can see why maybe Ibbotson has gone over. And as you said, Seb, I think the weather could have an impact as well on how they decide to run, whether they go with the extra midfielder, because obviously if it's going to be a wet day, even though they say it's only going to be 1 to 5 millimetres and only a 50% chance of that, it could have an impact on whether they go in with 2 or 3 talls for not just us, but for Port Adelaide as well. Obviously the inclusions, Stephen Hill due back this week after having a slight, they said a slight strain or potential issue there. So he'll certainly be testing his hamstring this week, you'd have to think, with the new revamped Adelaide Oval. And obviously Fremantle haven't had a chance to play on the ground, but having a look at it, the dimensions of Adelaide Oval are pretty similar to Subiaco. I think it's only slightly longer and I think it might be slightly wider, but it's pretty similar in dimensions to what Subiaco is. So I don't think the ground itself should hold any fears in terms of the size or length of the ground, that's for sure.
Yeah, it really comes down to the wet weather because if it was that big open white expanses, it's going to suit Port's game style. But if the weather's there, almost that space and everything goes out the door, and it gets down to who plays weather footy. But it would just be interesting to see how wet it is because the conditions as well. If it's a squally wind, that Port might slightly, even though they've only played a couple of games, might just be used to the conditions than what we have because we've never played a game there before. So. It'll be interesting to see how we go there for the first time, and I certainly can't wait. I'll be having across for this one, so I can't wait to get across and see the brand new facilities at Adelaide Oval compared to the old footy park.
Yeah, we've had a reasonably good record against Port lately. I know last year we won quite comfortably near the end of the season, and we were probably building up towards our peak form then. And sort of Port probably was struggling a little bit at the time, but it'll certainly they've got some key players back that probably weren't playing in that, and obviously Jared Polek's giving them an extra dimension through the midfield, and obviously having Robbie Gray back as well, being fit and firing, has sort of made them a much more dangerous presence down forward. So they've got a pretty good midfield depth with Wines, Ebert, Boak, Polek, Hartlett, and then you've got sort of guys like Matt White running through there as well. So they've got a reasonably good, and obviously Travis Boak. So I mean, they probably match us certainly in terms of depth, and they've got some big bodies in there as well. So it'll be definitely a tough game on them in terms of the midfield. And Sandilands will probably need to make sure we can get as much of that first ball as we can off because Lobs play reasonably well, but Sandilands should have the strength to get over the top of him.
Yeah, certainly. Like I just had a look at the last time we played at the end of last year. Lobie had 43 hit outs, but that was against Clark and Hannah. So this time around, I hope Sandilands can reverse those numbers and get about 40 for himself and give our midfielders first use because it's going to be great to have Fife, Barlow, Mundy all at his feet, and hopefully we'll be able to get some dominance out of the midfield because if we do have a weaker back line, one way to make it easy for them is to win it in the midfield, and certainly we've got the cattle to do that this week. So hopefully we can make sure it's not going down there as much because I know Ross will probably say that, if we decide to pick out and criticise the defenders, it starts upfield first. So let's hope we let our midfielders do the job.
Yeah, I think the key. I don't think it'll be so much the tools for us this week that'll be the problem for Port. I think it may actually be they've got a good little group of small to medium-sized forwards who are very, very dangerous on their day. So you obviously got Robbie Gray and Chad Wingard down there, and obviously Wingard last year was an All-Australian selection, but also Angus Monfries has come back after a couple of weeks and showed good form last week. So those three guys, we struggle a little bit with agile small forwards. So Lee Spur and Clancy Pearce and company will certainly have their work, and Duffield will have their work cut out this week playing against those guys if we don't have that pressure up the field, that's for sure.
Yeah, certainly make the biggest goal scoring avenues will be, I think, through those guys. And I don't see Westhoff and Schultz contributing to too much, but I reckon we could get caught, especially guys like Wingard and, like I said, Robbie Gray that have been scoring readily every week, and will make it quite interesting for our smaller defenders.
Yeah, absolutely. Who do you think our a couple of the key matchups are this week, Seppo? Which players do you think will go head to head?
We think the basic ones will be Crowley to Boak to really cover him, unless someone else decides to get off. But I really like that matchup because Boak can be so damaging, and he's got that bigger body, so you'd want to put the clamps on him. I reckon Polek, if he's really plays a running style game, a match up with Mzungu or even Sutcliffe might be good. You'd probably get Corns, or I don't know who else their other tagger is, if it's Young or someone going to Fife maybe. And
Well, it was interesting last year. Corns played on Daniel Pearce in the game at Subi last year, and there was
yeah, that's
probably
right.
a few eyebrows raised at that selection. So it'll be interesting to see who, Ken Hinkley decides to run Corns with. Obviously, he's going to have a run with Roll. I don't think Corns can play on Fife
Mm.
because obviously, if Fife does play in there, they'll just rotate him through the forward line, and I don't think Corns will have the height or marking negating ability to keep Fife quiet. So I think he'll go on probably more. You'd have to think he'll probably go on either Hill or Pearce.
Yep.
You would have to think that would be the choice that they would go with because I just don't. I think even if he goes on Monday, or someone like that. He, he's not the tallest player, but he obviously can run all day. So I think it'll be interesting to see which way Ken Hinkley decides to run with that in terms of their ability to shut down, or which midfielders they decide they think they can shut down.
I think Wingard's going to be one of their most damaging forwards. So if that's who we put Spur on, I think he might get outdone for speed there. So there's probably a bit of a risk that we've got to watch. We get our backline matchups, or we're going to get burnt, especially with pace, because Nick Subban, Spur, and Clancy Pearce aren't exactly quick over a short distance. So we want to make sure that they're not beating us with speed too much.
Yeah, it'd be interesting as well to see. I mean, Don Cassisi obviously is getting a little bit older now, but it still plays that sort of negating role. So it'd be interesting to see if they decide to put him on someone like Duffield and play that similar role that we have with De Boer in our side, where they'll shut down the best rebounding defender. I don't think Cassisi could probably play on Johnson, but he would certainly be a matchup for sort of Duffield or someone similar. So it'd be interesting to see which way how they use Cassisi in the whether they use him in the forward line or rotate him through that midfield group as well.
The way that Port have lined up, do you reckon we're in any chance with a squad of 25 going across with Hanneth, Sheridan, and Ibbotson, that you can see any potential late changes of players that might be underdone, or the weather affecting how we're lining up? Because you certainly wouldn't want to take any of Johnson or Silvani out, but it just depends on who's there to bring in one of those travelling players.
Well, you have to think the 18 has their name. I mean, they can't really make any changes unless there's an injury there. So you'd have to think it'd be unlikely. I mean, Sheridan is obviously going over just in case Stephen Hill probably doesn't come up.
Yeah.
They'll probably have another training run tomorrow in Adelaide. So if Hill, for whatever reason, is on 100%, you'd have to think Sheridan would be the sort of replacement for him. Ibbotson they may look at potentially if the matchups and the weather may not suit having an extra out there, or depending on which way they go with it. I just can't see Hanneth playing at all, to be honest. I'm not sure exactly why he went over, but unless there is some doubt on either Clark or Sandland, so I'd have to think there certainly doesn't seem to be anything in that way. So I'm surprised.
He's still got the opportunity to come back and play for Peel, isn't it? They've got their game on Sunday, so
yeah. Or have they got it this week on Sunday? I know they're playing West Perth. So hang on, we'll just have a quick look. Yeah, they are playing on Sunday. You're right. So yeah, that's probably the reason why they've taken him over. So he can certainly come back and play on the Sunday, which is Mother's Day as well. So it'd be interesting to see which way they go in that regard. Any other matchups that you're looking forward to see how they work?
Well, the interesting thing will be to see with Pavlich stuck on 597 career goals at the moment, if he decides to kick two and stop and handball them off if we're in a commanding position, or if he decides to go and kick three, because I think last time he got lined up on Jackson Trengove, he kicked 4 goals, 1 last year. So he's capable of kicking a few if we get the ball to him. So be interesting to see in his old stomping ground of Adelaide if he decides to put on a bit of a show, and I'll make sure I'm keeping count if he does kick his 600th goal, but he might pull the reins up, or just feed him off and be able to kick his 600th goal and his 300th game the week after, which will be quite an achievement. So it'll be great to keep an eye on Pav and see how much Trengove and Carlisle are going to put on him, keep him to.
Yeah, I mean, I think Pav would certainly slot him if he's available, and he can celebrate his 600th this week, and we can enjoy his 300th the next week at Subi against Geelong. So I mean, obviously the first WA player or base player to reach 300 games is certainly a massive achievement, considering the quality of players that maybe not so much in our side, but certainly on West Coast, who have been in their early days, and none of their players were able to get even close. So shows you how durable and how good a player he's been over the journey, so to speak. So yeah, let's hope he gets his 600th this week, and then we can celebrate his 300th next week as well. So obviously Port, in terms of their fitness, are considered one of the fitter sides in the league, and obviously their fourth quarters in particular, and they run all day. So having that good ball control for Fremantle and making sure that we sort of look after the ball and not give it away cheaply will be really important in terms of how we play the game. I think we got exposed a little bit against North Melbourne by when we did bomb the ball out. They sort of squeezed us in, and they got us on the rebound quite a few times with their sort of shotgun football. And I think it's really that ball control is going to be really key for the game this week.
Yeah, I suppose with that North Melbourne game, we really lacked that finish forward. With winning so many key stats, I think we've got the cattle to do that again in the midfield, but it's really how we actually finish and not let Port hurt us the other way, because they've certainly got the firepower, and I think they've been averaging over 100 points, one of the only two sides, I think, in terms of scoring power forward. So we've really got to make sure that we limit that opportunity, because if they get on a roll, it's going to make it hard for us to win. So we want to be playing on our terms and keep them to a low score, because we certainly have been struggling. And without Walters out of there, who's good for 2 or 3 goals a game, we're going to have to find different avenues to goal. And Neil's put his hand up, showing he's capable of that. And if we're playing main forward, he certainly needs to find form and get on the scoreboard a bit more. So hopefully we can actually put up a big score. I think if we're any chance of beating Port this week, we're going to have to be looking for 90 plus points on the board, and we can't expect too of a low score game, because they can certainly hit us quick, Port. So we just got to make sure that we actually put a decent score on and hold them off from doing the same.
Yeah, I mean, Port's form line's a little bit hard to tell at the moment as well, because, I mean, they obviously, if you look at their games they've played, they obviously had a stirring win against Geelong, but they have played a lot of poor sides this year. Obviously, Carlton have been pretty poor. They played Adelaide in round 2, who have been better in the last few weeks, but they were poor early on. North Melbourne they lost to North Melbourne at Etihad. Obviously, they destroyed Brisbane, but I mean, Brisbane have been very poor. I mean, they took a while to beat West Coast, and West Coast had their chances in that game as well with poor kicking. And obviously, they had a good game against Geelong and beaten GWS. So, out of all the wins they've had, they've actually probably played a number of teams that are in the bottom, probably half of the, or the bottom third of the league ladder. So, it'll be interesting. I mean, I don't know if you can always take an accurate indication based on the teams they've played so far. Obviously, the Geelong win was a very, very good win at home, and they, obviously were able to kick away there to win by 40 points. And obviously, their firepower is quite strong. But if you look at the games where they played some reasonable sides, I mean, even against West Coast, they only scored 70 points. So it'll be interesting to see. And even last week, GWS was still able to score 97 on them. So it'll be interesting to see this week when they're coming up against the side which probably does have a slightly stronger defensive mechanism than some of the teams they've played, to see how they do cope with it after the game from last year as well.
Yeah, it's true.
I mean, any other points you want to bring up in the wrap up for this week in the Port game, Seppo?
No, other than the fact that this game, if we do lose it, really just sort of means that we're sitting in that middle pack of sides, and we've really got to get that win if we're going to be considering ourselves our top 4 opportunity. This is like an 8-port game if Port are really going to be around that mark, or at least fighting with us for one of these spots around the finals. And really hope, even though I think we're starting to drift out with the latest exclusions from our side, we're drifting out in the odds. I think at the moment we're, 255 and Port are $1.52. So we are against it. But I think, that we've got a chance of winning. And if you want my tip now, I'm going to tip Freo on a close one by 5 points.
Okay. And yeah, I think it'll certainly be a really good game this week. And I think for me, I think Fremantle can get up. I think if they control the ball, they use it well, bringing it forward, and they're able to take advantage of the opportunities they will get, I think Fremantle can get up by 11 points. I think if it rains, any rain we get, I think will be a benefit for us, even though I know Port do have a relatively good group of big midfielders, and their smalls are quite strong as well. But I think any rain will certainly be of benefit to us as well, because we do play pretty well in the rain overall compared to some other sides as well. So it'll be certainly interesting to see what we do. And as you said, like the line's only 10.5, so it's an interesting that Fremantle are paying $2.55 for the win, yet the line's only 10.5. So there's not a lot of points there if in terms of usually if the betting teams are $2.55, the margin's a little bit higher than that. So it'll be interesting to see which way they go this week. But for those who, if anyone over there in Adelaide, Seppo, who's over for the game, are you guys having any drinks or anything on before the game this week or after the game? For those people who are over in Adelaide listening?
I'm not sure if there's going to be anything on because I'm certainly doing a quick fly out from Melbourne, get to the ground before to help prepare the banner, and be basically checking straight to the airport after the game's finished. So I'm sure there's great facilities around the ground in this new stadium. I'll certainly have a walk around just before the game to see everything, and it's a great little walk from the North Terrace of Adelaide straight over the River Torrens into the stadium. So I'm sure there'll be a couple of local drinking holes if we get up to get out and see. But I just hope that we can have a good support of Purple supporters around on the hill. I think we're on the North Terrace, the Freo cheer squad. So it's going to be a great game at a great venue.
Yeah, absolutely. And it'll be interesting to see how Fremantle do adapt to it. And obviously, let's hope that the inclusions, particularly Silvani this week, does manage to do the job on Schultz, because he obviously is leading the Coleman at the moment and has had a good season so far. So on his day, he can certainly be pretty damaging, along with Westhoff, who's been quite a revelation in the last 2 years. And if Westhoff does play on Johnson, that will certainly be a game of the two sort of mercurial type players. So it'll certainly be a lot of good matchups to watch, and it'll be probably one of the probably better games on this weekend with the split round on. That's for sure.
Yeah, certainly. Now, for anyone attending the Peel game on Sunday, there's a Fremantle Dockers have a members offer. I think if you present your membership, you actually get a discounted price for $10, I think, for entry to the stadium. I think they're playing West Perth, isn't it? Ranger Joondalup on
Yes.
Sunday. So get down that if you're not doing anything for Mother's Day, and it'll be great to see. Hopefully, there's a good contingent of Waffle players out there, guys that aren't on the injury list. It'll be good to see them go around in round 7 for them.
Yeah, and obviously, just before we do briefly, before we finish up, Seppo, it was good to see some of our players show a little bit more form again last week, with Griffin hitting 41 hitouts in the Peel game, and obviously Kepler Bradley coming back after a couple of recons and getting 24 touches. And I know there was a bit of talk on the forum this week about bringing him in, but I think he still needs probably, if you're not going to bring Morabito in after eight games in the Waffle, you're certainly not going to bring Bradley in after missing 2 years on 2 games worth of Waffle form either, for that matter.
Yeah, he's certainly getting close though, and it's great to see that we could have two or three of those players that have all recovered from real long-term injuries. Griffin, Morabito, and Bradley getting good numbers, and it'll be great to see if Morabito can get back out there, get some good numbers, and really put his hand up to earn a spot, maybe as a sub against Geelong the week after. Be great to see.
Yeah, and obviously interesting. We didn't really sort of touch on the sub too much, Seppo. Do you think? Do you think they'll go with? Who do you think they'll go with the sub this week? Because obviously, I mean, Crozier looks like the obvious choice, but if it is a wet game, they probably do need that smaller forward down there to do that. So obviously, Barlow is not going to get the role of probably Duffield. So who do you think will be? Do you think they may go with Subin as the sub again?
No, I think if it's going to be wet, they really need Subin right out there for the whole game and his sort of aggression on the ball. And Crozier might struggle with a big wet day for most of it. So I think you bring him on for impact. I think he's the one that really leads himself to the sub choice. I don't think it'll be one of Barlow or Duffield based on the interchange. And 90% of the time it comes from one of those players. I think Sutcliffe's over the days of the green vest. That's really going to get down to Crozier.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think De Boer's the sort of player that you want to play off the bench either. He's sort of more that lockdown player rather than having an impact. So I can't see him getting the gig either. So yeah, I think Crozier would be the obvious choice, but it'll be interesting to see which way Fremantle do go in that. But it's good to see that some of these guys are coming back and start pushing for spots. And obviously, it's up to those players to keep their spot in the 22, because there'll certainly be others knocking on the door pretty shortly. All right, guys. So thanks again for joining us, Seppo, this week.
No worries, and look forward to the game on Saturday. And any of you South Australians that you're getting down to the game, come down and say hello and enjoy the game.
Absolutely, and hopefully we'll see a good Fremantle contingent there. And although I've seen a couple of sort of games on TV, it'll be nice to watch Fremantle play in somewhere that wasn't the old hole that was West Lakes. And hopefully we'll sort of christen the ground with a win this week. And because one of those, a win in the next two, or the next two games are going to be crucial in terms of setting us up for the rest of the season. That's for sure. All right, thanks for joining us again, guys, and we'll catch you again next week. Bye for now.